Thor, god of thunder, son of Odin, mighty avenger, a hero who encapsulates the mythic and mystical side of Marvel Comics through roaring adventures that have taken him across the 9 realms and back, time after time. For a character whose iconic status has remained at the center of Marvel for more than 5 decades, it may be hard to believe that there was a time when Thor was considered worn out and in need of temporary retirement. But that was exactly the case in 2004, when Thor and the world of Asgard was put on hiatus, with the publication of Thor number 587 by Michael Avon Oeming. The story would see Thor willingly bring about Ragnarok, the total destruction of Asgard and its people, in an effort to stop a continual cycle of death and rebirth, exploited by shadowy gods feeding off their life force. With his fellow Asgardians dead and the predatory gods destroyed for good, Thor would place himself into a cosmic slumber and be gone from Marvel Comics for nearly 3 years, missing out on such developments as Civil War during that time. But Thor's absence from Marvel came to an end with the resurrection of the god of thunder and his world that brought the character closer to humanity in both location and spirit in 2009. Thor was reborn by writer J. Michael Straczynski, who not only authored comics such as The Amazing Spider-Man, Rising Stars, and Fantastic Four, but was also behind the television shows Babylon 5 and Sense8. When paired with artists including Olivier Coipel, Straczynski would return Thor to a preeminent position within the Marvel Universe in a run of comics that went on to echo through both subsequent stories and the films that followed. In total, JMS's run on Thor would only last 17 issues, a meager amount when compared to most other well-regarded author runs on the character that lasted anywhere from 50 to 100. But why is Straczynski's Thor storyline worthy of being held up against so many others despite its brief span and incomplete arc? It's because of the bracing, unforgettable freshness of his take on the character that not only helped bring back the God of Thunder from an extended hiatus in an acclaimed manner, but also injected Thor and his world with enough potent ideas to keep him exciting and distinct for years to follow. And it all emanates from Straczynski's choice to put a more human, relatable burden on the shoulders of the God of Thunder. When Thor was originally introduced in 1962, he lived with the dual identity of Dr. Donald Blake, an ordinary man who would turn into the God of Thunder by striking his cane on the ground, simultaneously transforming the piece of wood into the mystical hammer Mjolnir. The Blake persona was eventually removed by writer Walter Simonson in the 80s to free up Thor for more grandiose adventures and was rarely spoken of afterward. However, Straczynski chose to make Blake a central aspect of his approach to Thor. The Doctor was shown to have come back to life when Thor passed away, and eventually resurrected the Thunder God when he found and lifted Mjolnir after it crashed down on Earth. Meeting in a realm between life and death, Blake convinced Thor that he could once again make a difference in the universe, freed from his previous destiny of Ragnarok. Blake and Thor were once again bonded together and brought back to life, but this time could mentally communicate with one another while switching places on Earth. By making Blake and Thor 2 unique personalities whose human and godlike natures both contrasted and reflected one another, JMS was able to make Blake much more interesting than his past iterations, while keeping Thor grounded. But this shift within the central character wasn't the only crucial aspect of Straczynski's unique take. With Asgard gone from the cosmos, Thor magically rebuilds his mystical home on Earth, creating a floating kingdom just outside the tiny town of Broxton, Oklahoma. The sight of mighty Asgard floating above the dry plains of Midwest America casts the mystical realm in stark contrast against the most run-of-the-mill towns. In doing so, the mythical nature of Thor and his world is brought away from the far-flung cosmos and much closer to everyday life, creating a playful absurdity as well as a sense of epic grandeur given an understandable and relatable scale. As stated by Straczynski when asked about his decisions in restarting the comic, the obvious choice is to put Thor into something cosmic, which is why it's been done so much. So what does that look like if we turn it upside down? You put him on Earth, in a setting as far from cosmic as you can get without sliding into an alternate universe. It's all about contrasts. Put him in small-town America among regular folks, and suddenly the contrast in power elevates him substantially. The same works in terms of heightening the style and distance between a god and mortals. Put Thor in the Avengers, and you get respect. Put Thor in a small town, and you get awe. And what the character needed most, I felt, was a really strong injection of awe. Along with the new Asgard comes new life for the many supporting characters in Thor. The hero soon discovers that his people have been reborn in human bodies scattered across the globe, and must draw them out from their mortal shells and into new life on Earth. Thor's global quest brings Heimdall out of a Hurricane Katrina survivor, the Warriors 3 from a group of Doctors Without Borders bodyguards, Baldur from the armored menace of the Destroyer, and many more. In doing so, Asgardian lives are further connected to the human world than ever before, but their connections are the cause of confusion and the need to better understand their new circumstances before their mistakes become fatal. Along with these new changes comes the most surprising one in the resurrection of Loki, with the brother of Thor now turned into a woman. But the deceitful nature of Loki remains in this new form, and her long-term schemes present the greatest threats to Asgard, which play out in both quiet subterfuge and massive fights. Strangely, in the decades since JMS's stories, the multi-layered anti-hero approach to Loki that has become the norm in both comics and films now makes this strictly villainous yet classic take on the character feel out of date to some degree. But for those looking for old-school villain Loki with a new twist, JMS's Thor certainly delivers. With the initial arc and character designs drawn by Olivier Coipel, Thor and company take on a more practical look that feels like a hybrid between medieval and Viking. The God of Thunder's look is changed from Jack Kirby's eccentric and stark design into something more battle-ready. Coipel gives the character armor and a more practical physicality that goes along with the earthbound setting. Of course, the redesign proved controversial at the time, given that Thor's costume had gone largely unchanged, save for a few temporary deviations since his debut. However, the armor and cloth feels more palpable while still being heightened to an appropriate superhero level. This can also be seen in the changes present in the look of fellow Asgardians. Asgard itself feels more real as well. Sure, it's a floating castle, but Coipel and his fellow artists on the title give it a rough, warm feel that is more in line with ancient castles that can be seen in Europe today than the mystical realm of comics past. Gone is the Rainbow Bridge and magical artifacts. In their place are flatbed trucks and long treks across the Oklahoma plains. And the nearby town of Broxton is also given its own stalwart residents and landmarks. Most specifically, young diner cook Bill Jr., who falls in love with the Asgardian Kelda. Their contrasting natures but fish-out-of-water love story becomes the most obvious bridge between the two worlds, as well as the source of the story's most brutal tragedy. Both this side plot and the larger narrative threads of the comic are built very slowly by Straczynski. It's clearly apparent that the author favored a decompressed, character-centric take to story development over grand adventure, as his first 6 issues are largely focused on the recreation of Asgard and the resurrection of its people, rather than a major conflict or villain. It's a storytelling choice that may frustrate readers in search of grand myths, and perhaps, if JMS had dived into a larger narrative more quickly, he would have gotten further into his story, given the few issues he wrote by the end. Following the re-establishment of Thor's world, we see how quickly things fall apart due to Loki's machinations, culminating in a massive battle with an ancient Asgardian that sees Thor make sacrifices for both human and Asgardian kind. However, the strength of JMS's story is in allowing his characters to breathe and emote, rather than accomplish a mission. In doing so, the author builds an interior life for the God of Thunder. The central motivation of Thor, striving for greater purpose now freed from past destiny and shouldering the burden of an unknown future, informs his struggles throughout JMS's stories. The lives of his fellow Asgardians are now the direct result of Thor's will, and, as such, their futures are his responsibility to some degree, despite being individual, free-willed people. But one of the few gods who remains dead is Thor's father Odin, a staunch and often unforgiving ruler who remains a symbol of Asgard's past ways. When discussing with Blake what he would wish for his people, as well as his reluctance to resurrect his father, Thor states, "We have here the means for creating a new future, free of the old ways, the old rules, the old limitations. Odin would know only those ways. He would lead us down familiar paths. I do not wish to walk those roads again, Blake. Nor would I lead any of my people down them. Their deaths have purchased for them the right to find new lives. Lives of hope. Lives they wish to lead. Not the lives they were forced or fated to lead. The excitement of a new future also means the chance for grave mistakes, with both possibilities the result of newfound freedom, as highlighted by Blake's reply to Thor's hopes. "There are no easy answers, Thor. Wouldn't be life if there were. Mistakes and victories, new relationships and old rivalries." The story of Thor under J. Michael Straczynski was an exploration of ancient gods suddenly being confronted with greater mortality than ever before, and struggling against the constant temptation to revert to the old ways. Actions like an ignorant duel turned accidentally fatal, or even a town hall meeting that reveals Asgard's, lack of knowledge regarding indoor plumbing, explore the highs and lows of Thor's new destiny. There's an added weight given to it all by placing earth-shaking conflict adjacent to small-town worries. Through it all, the majesty and grandeur of Asgard remains, with a new sheen given by its humble surroundings. But the slow burn of Thor's embracing of a new destiny, and an Asgard forced to be more human than ever, was not to last. Straczynski's run came to a close with the giant-sized Thor finale published in November 2009, which saw a few threads brought to a close, but the story of Loki's deceit and a coming conflict with Doctor Doom unfinished. Straczynski, who had accepted the position on Thor with the stipulation that no Marvel Comics event would interfere with his story for at least 6 issues, had learned that Asgard would soon be embroiled in the upcoming event that would be known as Siege. As a result, the author quickly ended his tenure. "I agonized over this for months, then finally I went to the ever-patient and wonderful editor and publisher and said of the coming event, 'I really hate this because creatively I'm having the time of my life, but I think I need to let go of the book or risk screwing it up when we hit the event.' There were no creative differences, no animosity, no rancor, just the question of how to handle being caught in the switches. There are no horror stories here." Straczynski's reasons, humble as they may be, highlight the author's focus on keeping Thor's adventures small and tightly contained. A story like Siege, which would see Asgard invaded by the villain Norman Osborn and his government forces, is the exact opposite. Fast, fun, but grandiose, Siege would bring countless heroes and villains into Thor's narrative and reshape both Asgard, largely destroyed in the conflict, and the Marvel Universe as a whole, which overthrew the villainous tyrants that had ruled America for several years prior in the era known as the Dark Reign. Straczynski's story would be taken over by Kieran Gillen, who resolved the conflict with Doom and led Thor through Siege, followed by Matt Fraction, who shoved Thor back into galactic adventures in a run that is most certainly not a classic. Through it all, the small, human scale of Straczynski's Thor would recede in favor of more conventional, cosmic battles. Even in light of such changes, the compelling humanity and its offbeat alterations to Thor and Asgard still feel fresh in comparison to so many other stories revolving around the character. A decade later, J. Michael Straczynski's Thor remains a vibrant and potent exploration of humanity within a god, and a god's impact on the humanity that surrounds him.